I've been gardening with my grandma since I was 5 years old, meaning over the decades, I have seen a million different trends come and go, and I've tried a million different trends for better or for worse. I've spent hundreds, if not thousands, of dollars on seed starting equipment, and I can tell you with the utmost confidence that these 25 rapid fire tips when it comes to seed starting can and will save you a ton of money. It is an incredibly blunt analysis of everything possible I've seen and what actually works at the end of the day. If you don't know who I am, hi, hello, my name's Ashley. I have a bachelor's of science in soil science, and that was actually triggered because I liked gardening so much, starting at 5 years old with my grandma. I decided to go get a degree in it. So here we are making YouTube videos now at this point. With that being said, if you like science, soil science, plant science, and applying it to a garden, then I suggest you hit that subscribe button because I've got a ton of videos coming out next week all about soil and plant science and how it applies directly to your garden and how you can definitely up your game when it comes to your yields, regardless of where you may reside on planet Earth. Over 50% of you who watch the videos are not yet subscribed, which is crazy to me. It is incredibly helpful to the channel, and it is a free thing to do. So just double check you are subscribed. If you're not, hit that subscribe button. I promise I will not disappoint you. Number one is to actually use a seed starting mix, not a potting soil, when it comes to starting your seeds indoors. Potting soils are high in nutrients. They're also high in organic materials such as compost and manures and vermicast. And all of these can and will result in fungal growth because it is very microbially alive, and there's lots of food source there for said microbes. So if you want to avoid that, then you want to actually avoid potting soil. What you want to do is go for a seed starting mix, which is relatively inert. It usually is peat or coconut coir, perlite, and then maybe vermiculite. You can actually very easily make this on your own. And some of the best ways to get a finer mix, which allows for very good seed to soil contact, is via the dehydrated bricks of peat and or coir. That is probably the number one way to go because it is very fine. It won't have those sticks or twigs that you will see in the bags that are not yet dehydrated. Which leads me to my next tip, and that is vermiculite. If you are starting flower seeds, tiny little flower seeds, and or just tiny little herbs for that matter, skip the potting soil, skip the seed starting mix, go straight to vermiculite only. Vermiculite is airy, it is light, and it will not allow the seeds to be exposed to excessive levels of moisture. It also will allow those seeds to get exposed to the light that they need, which is much needed if they are photoperiod sensitive photoperiod sensitive plants, and or they're tiny seeds that when they're buried, get buried too deep too quickly. I use this method for all my flower seeds. These seeds have very tiny energy reserves, and so they don't have much oomph to push past heavy levels of peat or coconut coir. Now, another thing you can actually use vermiculite for is top dressing your seed starting cells. So if you've used peat or coir to actually start your seed, one way to make sure you definitely don't end up with mold is actually top dressing with vermiculite. Now, the reason for this is because vermiculite kind of breaks up the interface of the surface of the soil, which means that you don't get that algae, you don't get that matting, and you don't get that fungal growth because the surface is actually severed by the vermiculite, which allows for airflow, etc., and so forth. So I find that a fine dusting, even on my tomatoes, my peppers, eggplants, datura, castor beans, cucumbers, you name it, just that little bit of a fine dusting can make a big difference. It is much, much more scientifically sound than using cinnamon out of the cupboard. We'll say that much. Number 5 is that compost straight up in seed starting cells or vermicast in seed starting cells straight up is incredibly risky. You have the risk of fungus gnat eggs, you have the risk of pathogens, and you just have the risk of not fully composted material. All of these can in turn actually suppress germination via allelopathic properties, meaning that the material that made the compost is exuding chemicals that are very naturally exuded in nature that actually suppress the germination of seeds nearby. Because it's a survival mechanism that plants have adapted to in the wild where they drop their material on the ground and then it decomposes, releases the chemical, and ensures that there's no competition in and around its babies. So We want to avoid actually using compost. If you notice you have very low germination rates and you're using compost, that may actually be the reason for why. This also is really important for when we're seed starting outdoors. Number 2 is your soil temp. So your soil temp is hugely important to making sure that you get proper germination rates, whether that's indoors or outside. Now, this is an outdoor soil temp thermometer, which I highly encourage you to use. My ground is still frozen freaking solid, so this is still in hibernation as far as I'm concerned, but heat mats with dials can help with the indoor stuff. The takeaway here is that you want to Google what temperature your seeds need to germinate in, and then make sure you try to get as close to that as possible. You'd be shocked. A 1 to 2 degree difference can make a big difference in regards to how many of your seeds actually germinate versus how many of your seeds rot. Next up is that heat mats aren't just solely used for germinating plants that like warmer soils. It actually can be used to germinate any sort of seed quicker. So if you've noticed that you may or may not have fallen behind in your seed starting process and you're thinking to yourself, I am not going to be able to catch up or keep up to the pace that I need to be at, well, lucky you, you can actually use a heat mat to increase the germination rates. And you can sometimes half these. The key here, though, is that once you see some of the cells around 30% germinating, you're going to pull it off the heat mat because that means the rest of them are coming very soon after. You can also almost be guaranteed that that first 30% that did germinate under those heat mats can and will be a little bit leggy because it got a little bit too much of a head start. So you can expect some weaker seeds, but all that means is maybe starting a couple extra. And none of the weaker seeds are detrimentally weaker, if you will. They're just going to look a little bit funny for the interim. Now, another way you can do this is actually via the yogurt maker feature, either via a yogurt maker and or inside of your Instant Pot yogurt maker feature. What you want to do is just a damp paper towel, put your seeds in, put it in the yogurt maker for 24 to 48 hours, then seed them or put them into your seed cells and watch the magic happen. It actually is quite stunning how quickly it can happen. This is a great tip to use come end of April, beginning of May, when you have not yet started your tomato seed. Next one is that temperature differential or temperature differences between day and nighttime temps actually support better germination. So in nature, temperatures naturally rise during the day and they drop at night. This means for things like wildflowers in particular, the fluctuation in temperature between daytime and nighttime temps can actually make a big difference in how many of your seeds germinate. So the way to mimic this naturally is to make sure that your lights are obviously on a timer and that they shut off if they are emitted any levels of heat. Another way to ensure this happens is maybe you have them in a warmer room during the day, then you pull them out into a cooler room during the night. The other way to do this is actually to have your heat mat on the lowest setting if it's not a plant that normally needs heat, and then actually linking it up to the same timer that your light is on. Essentially, all you want to do is coincide your photo period with your heat from ambient and or from the soil. Obviously, if this is outdoors, you don't have to mimic or alter this because it's just going to naturally happen, which is why things like winter sowing, for example, work so well for wildflowers and native plants. Next up is that soil actually warms much slower than the air. So it can take up to 2 weeks for your soil to even begin to heat up. And one way you can actually increase that is via solarization. Now, solarization can be used as a sterilization factor, but it can also just be used in the interim on a short-term basis to actually increase the temperature of your soil. So if you are interested in getting into the garden sooner, things like obviously low tunnels would help, but you could also just put some poly on that soil surface for a week or two, and that will substantially increase your soil temp. Use your soil temp thermometer to see kind of where everything's sitting at, and then go from there. Next up is the lighting section. So when you're looking for lights, there are so many different options out there. There's really cheap ones, there's really expensive ones. And the truth is that the cheap ones can be just as effective as the expensive ones. All we're looking for is called PPFD, photosynthetic photon flux density. Lighting typically needs somewhere between 100 to 300 PPFD. So all you want to do is actually look at the PPFD that is emitted from the light. This is usually very easy to find, whether it's Amazon or an actual lighting company. And then you want to make sure you land between 100 and 300. If you intend to use this light for fruiting, flowering, houseplants, that sort of thing, it's going to change the conversation slightly. But if we're literally just looking at seed starting and we want to not waste our money and kind of spend the bare minimum, 100 to 300 ppfd is kind of where we want to land to avoid those leggy plants. Now, I have an entire video about PPFD, about lights, about the crazy looking rainbow curve things you see. I will link it if you want to watch it, but that will go into more depth. But essentially, Cole's Notes, look for 100 to 300 ppfd. Next up is light distance matters. So some lights will have dimmers on them, some will not. If they do not have dimmers, then you need to look at the height. You actually want those lights nearly kissing those seedlings if you've got a weaker light for seed starting. Now, if you are noticing downturned leaves and or sunburning, then you actually want to lift the light up. So you want to look for indicators of plant stress from light, and you obviously want to ensure you don't end up with lightly seedlings. So the way to start off with is pretty much having that light somewhere around 3 to 4 inches from the surface of the plant, if possible. The number of hours the plant is exposed to is hugely important. You need darkness to allow for biological processes to take place, but you also need light in order for growth to take place. Now, growth actively takes place or rapidly takes place around 14 to 16 hours of light per day range. Less than that, and we have a slower growth response. More than that, and we actually are causing undue stress to the plant. So a timer is important, but aiming for between 14 to 15, so call it 15 hours of light, is going to be ideal. Now, I will say, because I've made this mistake in the past myself, my timers sometimes will get unplugged. My timers will sometimes not be set up correctly. I want you to try to aim to get your outdoor light that's coming into the house to be lined up as closely with your lights as possible. We want the outdoor light and the indoor light to be on at the same time. We don't want the indoor light to be off while the outdoor light is on, aka the sun, and vice versa. This can extend the light hours too much, and it also can cause a substantial amount of leaning, oddly enough, and stress via phototropism, where the plant will lean. So what the plant will do is it will lean towards the light during the day when that grow light is off, and then when the grow light is on, it'll lean back. And so it's just too much movement, phototropism movement, that we want to try to avoid whenever possible. So try to line those up as closely as you can. Next up is actually that blue light reduces legginess. So if you've ever looked at a seed starting light and you've noticed that there are some different light ranges, if you're aiming for just one, blue is the one that actually reduces the legginess of your plants. Next up is overwatering can kill your plants, and that is why things like misters are key to success. So mister is fabulous. All you're going to do is actually mist your plants down. And in turn, what happens is you end up with some stellar growth. So I have this one. It's like a continuous mister. I'm not going to use it because once I pump it, it just keeps going. It's a very fine mist. I use this on my small flower seedlings. I don't typically use this on like tomatoes or anything like that. However, you could if you wanted to. This will prevent overwatering. It will also prevent fungus gnats because it's not enough to allow for too much water to sit there for fungus gnats to lay eggs and cause or wreak havoc on you. But it is enough water to water said plants and keep them happy and healthy. Next up is bottom watering. More specifically, if you can get a tray suspended over water. So the humidity from that bottom tray will move up into those seed cells. But furthermore, it will actually cause the roots to dig for water, which in turn will result in longer root systems, which is perfect for when we go to transplant them outdoors. But if you're bottom watering or you're misting, again, we want to ensure that that top layer does dry out in some capacity. This prevents against excessive levels of algae growth, excessive levels of fungi, excessive levels of gnat eggs, dabbing off, you name it. And the biggest culprit of reasons for why I don't see the soil surface actually drying out is the overuse of humidity domes. So once everything's actually germinated, I would say around 50% has germinated. It's time to pull that humidity dome off. It's no longer of any use to you. It's actually causing more problems than good. Next up is that algae is probably one of your first signs that and the next sign will be damping off. So your warning sign is the green algae. Now, don't get me wrong. Algae is not a bad thing. It's It's actually very good for a healthy soil system, and that includes a seed starting system for that matter. But we don't want it there when we have such a small microclimate because we don't have enough room to deal with it, if you will. So it's not harmful. It doesn't have to be scraped off. We can leave it in place. We just need to allow that soil surface to dry out. So fun fact, algae, very good for your soil, very integral part of a healthy soil. Seed age matters more than you think. So some people think they can buy seeds on sale and then keep those seeds indefinitely. But things like onions and parsnips only have a shelf life of about 1 year. If you have pelleted lettuce seeds, for example, you've got 6 months. So I highly encourage you to only buy what you need and plant everything you have and then save seeds from that. It will reduce a lot of frustration and heartbreak in the following years to come. Larger seed cells grow stronger plants. So what I mean by this is that if you have a larger root system, you have a plant that is more resistant to any sort of transplant shock that may take place. The more root biomass we have, the better. Which actually brings me into my next tip, which is getting very tall, long seed cells. So these are meant for things like tomatoes, peppers, trees, anything that is a larger size plant where we want to develop a very long sized root that will in turn make a plant more resistant to any sort of transplant shock. So these are grabbed off of Amazon. They're called root trainers. You can get really fancy ones. You can get really inexpensive ones. The year's 50 in here, and these are inexpensive. So this is a much better choice than your just regular seed starting container. So root trainers are absolute must if you're going through a drought and or you want a nice long taproot system. If I was doing an orchard, or if I was starting a whole bunch of strawberries, or if I was starting a whole bunch of berry bushes, or anything like that, I would definitely invest in some of these bad boys. Next up is that airflow actually causes a stronger plant for a number of different reasons. We have thigmorphotropism. We have obviously the thickening of the stem. We obviously have the removal of excessive levels of moisture. We also have the replacement of CO2, the removal of excessive levels of oxygen. We have the decrease in pests. We have a whole video on it, actually, if you want to learn more. That's all I'm going to say about fans. There is such thing as too much and there is such thing as too little. So check out that video if you want to learn more. Next up is that hardening off actually changes your plant's physiology. So your sun is about 10 times stronger than your grow lights, which means if you don't harden off, you will end up with sunburn. Now I'm going to do a separate video on this, but I will say my most famous hack for not hardening off is actually just using containers, and you just cut a hole in the bottom of the container and you use it as like a little mini shield. I use buckets, I use coffee tins, I use cardboard boxes, you name it. If have a hole put in the bottom of it, it is going to be used for hardening off my plants. I don't like moving trays in and out of greenhouses or in and out of my living room. Not for me, but I like to cheat, and that is the best way to cheat. Next up is that bigger plants do not always transplant better. Actually, quite the opposite. I find bigger plants actually have the greatest transplant shock, and they also go into this kind of pseudo dormancy period for a longer period of time than transplanting a smaller plant. Now, I'm starting tomatoes at various different times throughout this spring/winter, I guess, technically. And I will show the results of that, but I can almost guarantee you every single one of these plants will be the exact same size down near end of July, because that's just the way it works. Geek crew, you know the drill. If you have any sort of tips and tricks that can save anyone out, please put them in the comment section down below. This is what Google says you should watch next based on what you've been searching. And that is my latest and greatest video. I will talk to you guys next time. Bye.